just continue. And excellent. Okay, welcome everybody. Good morning to our CS 181 course. Let me click over, that's the right button, yes. Last time we were talking about retrieval augmented generation, RAG, and we'll continue talking about that this time. We'll go into more about what you need for your homework assignment. But before we do that, I have also now taken a look at all of the homeworks that have been submitted, and there's still two that haven't been submitted yet. If that's an accident on your part, make sure that you have submitted those. Put in zeros. There's, I think, maybe 5 or 6 people that have zeros at this point. If you resubmit though, or just email me if Sakai doesn't let you resubmit, then I will regrade all of those assignments. Everybody else, if you did not get a 0, you got 1 million points. So probably the most points of your whole college career just from that one assignment there. Good job. And what I gave some minor feedback to people about, especially definitely the people who I put in zeros. I typed out the things that you need to fix in order to get that grade improved back to 1 million points. And so please do that. If you have any questions about that, then about what I typed there, what you need to do, let me know. Happy to work that, whatever the issue is, clarify things with you. But yes, overall, very happy with the homework assignments. I know a lot of you, there was a lot of new things in this class for many of you in this assignment. The LLM stuff, obviously, but also just in general, using all the GitHub and the testing tools, and then me doing everything in the terminal. Lots of different moving parts, very new to people. A lot of people asking great questions here and in my office hours. But been very pleased with that, and then pleased with everybody's submissions as well. So good job on all of that. That said, you see I have a bunch of tabs open up here on my screen. I have everybody's submission open up here on screen, and I'm going to go through and tell you all the things wrong with everybody's submission. Normally, I wouldn't do that live in front of everybody, but because you all did a great job, and because it's not a small class, but it's a smaller class, we can do that. And my sense is that, so normally I give feedback on the assignments, and you lose points, and students don't actually care about any of that because, like, I don't know, you have whatever your target grade is and you get that or don't get that, and you don't even care about what the material was, you just want to get your target grade. But I actually want us to not really think about the grades in this class so much as just thinking about the material. And so that's what I want to focus on. And I think if we do it together, then it'll maybe, some things will hit home a little bit harder. But again, my hope is that nobody's embarrassed. Everybody has things that I will nitpick on here. And again, overall, very, very good submissions. Very pleased with things. Any questions before I get started? Yeah, Alex. Everything. It'll be different for everybody. We'll see how it goes. How I feel when I get to everybody's.
Have you already thought of your feedback, or you just know you're going to be able to find things?
Both. So this first one.
Why am I first?
Yeah, why are you first? So the first thing that always jumps out to me when I'm looking at a GitHub repo are the hidden files in the GitHub repo, because hidden files are probably hidden for a reason. And I saw this .env file here in Luis's repo, and so I clicked on it, and I saw this juicy little secret right here. And so my first question was, like, is this actually a valid API key? And so I went into my own, let's make this a little bit bigger here so we can see what's going on. My own, I'll do it in the RAG News repository here. And let's go sideways this way. Just to test out this API key. And Python 3-i. Actually, there was a good issue in GitHub, which I'll get to after doing all this, about how to run the ragnews.py file and interactively. But this is what I do is, oops, I have to first activate my environment so that Grok is installed, run that, and whoops, that's not what I'm running, run that. And now it's saying that I need the Grok API key in order to do things. So this thing down here, I can export that, whoops, export and then paste this API key like that and run this. And now it's connected to not my API key, but Luis's. And I can ask like, okay, who are the presidential candidates? And it's not going to be using up my my tokens. It'll be using up his. So I mean, at this point, like, who cares? Like, it's a free service and whatnot. Press Control D right here. D for Delta gets me into Python here. I know I'm in Python because I have these 3 greater than signs right here. And I've been thinking for the last 12 hours, basically, this is what I dreamed about how can I exploit this API key for fun in class right here. And so the first thing that I thought of is that if I have somebody's API key, well, I can do a denial of service on their account. There we have this, I created this run LLM function here. We pass in the system parameter of like, I am a bad bot. I don't know, do something bad. Say some, what is an API? What is an API key? And it's doing that, and now I can put this in a while loop while true. I don't even know how to do this in Python. Control while true. This up arrow, come here, add the spaces. And oh, I need to capitalize true. And now, now this API key is not usable by anybody else because I'm using all of the possible tokens on here, just eating it up. And so the last time when we were talking about this, people were asking like, what's the big deal about leaking an API key if it's not tied to an account or something? Well, if your business is built on it and I find your API key, at this point, I could now do some extortion and say like, your website is down, it's not working right now. You have to pay me however much money I think you can afford before I turn off my denial of service attack, and you can have your service again. Oh, but maybe that's still not important. So I was thinking about like, what are some more fun things that I can do with this API key? And like, I don't know, you guys don't have big businesses. You're probably like not rich enough to be worth extorting. But one thing that I could do is like frame you for a crime. So like here, passing to this run LLM function, maybe I want to say like, I plan to assassinate the president. So basically, I don't know, recreate what happened to Trump. I want to actually kill all the politicians. And I'm not going to hit enter right now, but if I do hit enter, then this message will be sent to Grok in this case, and it'll be recorded in their logs forever. And so after I have seeded this other account, which is not mine, with these bad things here, I can go commit that crime. The FBI does their investigation, subpoenas all these different services looking for people who are planning to do this type of activity. And now instead of finding me, they find Luis. And so lots of reasons why you want to keep your API keys secure. Any questions about that? Yes.
Yeah, does Grok like log IP address and stuff like that, or do they just like keep the API?
Oh, the question is, does Grok log the IP addresses? I mean, I'm not at their company, so I don't know for sure, but the answer is that it's like a trivial thing to do. It's the default thing to do, so probably yes. But even still, like everybody who's connected to the wireless here goes through the same IP address, and so there's no way to differentiate any of our like laptops here from each other, other than the fact that they're what the API key is. So that would not be a defense that you could use for something like this. But good question. Yeah.
He removed it. Can you still access it?
Okay, so the question is down here, if we refresh this now, We get a 404 page not found. And this is good thinking. I was hoping that I would do this next time on somebody, but we'll just go ahead and do it now. And I'll go into the commit history right here. And everything that's ever been added to a Git repo, the nice thing about Git, but also the sharp edge about Git is that once something is added, it is there forever. And so I can just go back in time here to yesterday and browse files right here. And there's the environment thing again. And so it is still up there for everybody to see. And so the proper way to, like, once a thing has been released in any form, in any way, once something has touched the internet, you can't take it off the internet. There are bots that are just crawling GitHub all the time, looking for these API keys, and they don't use them right away because they don't want people to, like, if things get used right away, people will remember, oh, I just committed this thing, or I've been working on this project. They usually wait a couple months until they start using these API keys. Serious criminal organizations like the various drug cartels do like very nasty things using these API keys, and so they have all sorts of very sophisticated tricks to prevent themselves from being caught. So they're not going to take advantage of this right away. So the thing that you have to do if your API key touches the internet in any form whatsoever is you have to go to that service and disable that API key. That's the only solution to this. Yeah, good question. Yes.
Well, I mean, I know you just said the only solution, but what would be like leave the whole repo and re-upload it without?
Oh, so this is a good question. The question is, like, what if we deleted the whole repo from the internet and then re-uploaded it? At that point, nobody could get the API key newly, but I already have the API key. And this API key will also be available on the internet via YouTube if somebody wanted to manually type it out there. But it's also the case that these like serious criminal organizations like cartels, they have already scraped your API key here. There's probably like, I guess, I don't want to make up a number, but it's essentially guaranteed that some criminal has your API key, and they are just going to wait. They don't want to use it right away because then they'll burn the API key because you won't. You'll notice if they use it right away, but if they wait a while, then they can use it without causing maybe as much alarm. So it's common to for them to wait. So you really have to just like disable the API key and create a new one. Yeah, good question. And this is the sort of thing that I made this exact mistake when I was preparing for the first lecture in class. And I uploaded, I created my git ignore file in the wrong order and uploaded my own API key. And I said all sorts of bad words to myself and went over immediately to the Grok API or the Grok webpage and disabled that API key and created a new one. So this is the sort of mistake that everybody makes all the time. You just have to be aware that this is like a serious mistake and take immediate corrective actions if you make this mistake. All of you in your illustrious careers will make this mistake multiple times, and you just want to make sure that you're the person who fixes it after you make the mistake and not the person who leaves it around and then somebody exploits your company for millions of dollars. But yeah, question starting with Alex first.
Oh, someone asked if there's no way to, this is Joe.
Question is, are there ways to delete commits from Git repos? The answer is that there are, but you probably don't want to do that. And it's certainly not a defense in something like this case. But it's a very rare situation where you want to actually mess with the history. Max?
So if you create a private repo still that.
Question is, what about private repos? And now the answer is here. If it's private, it is also the case that nobody else can have access to it. You'd have to have some sort of insider on GitHub to have access to it. And that's probably not in your all things that you have to worry about. But you also, it is good to be in the practice of like just having like one set of habits that you're in. Because if you do things differently on private repos and public repos, then eventually the things that you do in private repos, you're going to accidentally do in the public repos, and leak your API key or whatever other bad thing could happen. So even if I were working with private repositories, then I would still not ever commit API keys. Private things have a way of becoming public. Speaking of private repositories, there was a private repository submitted by Amelia. I think you just accidentally made it private instead of public. In general, you always want to I always recommend students make all of your repositories 100% public all the time. Never get in the habits of private repositories. A lot of times students think you want a private repository because of maybe embarrassed of your code. You think it's not the best example of the things that you can do, and so you don't want, I don't know, a future employer seeing it or something. There's never, like, nothing bad will ever happen to you from having more activity on GitHub. The only thing that can happen is good things from having more activity on GitHub. So just be in the habit of doing everything public. I saw some other hands. So yeah,
I
Brian.
was gonna say that, like, OpenAI has, I don't know, they have some network of bots that search GitHub, and if they find your API key, they'll just disable it for you, which is nice. I don't know how much resources they put into that or even how well it works. I just know that I was stupid enough to upload my API key at one point, and it just like within 5 minutes it was shut off.
Yeah. So a lot of companies are more proactive about things like that. It turns out there are situations though, like where it's impossible to like detect those things automatically. But yeah, a lot of companies are more proactive about that. Yes, OpenAI more important than Grok because it's actually tied to like bank accounts and things. So that's why Grok's not wasting their resources on disabling API keys that they detect. Good point though. Okay, next repository here, Ainsley. So I also saw this .env here and almost got excited, but I clicked on it, and there is this paste your API key here. This is actually a really good thing to do when you have secrets. That it's very easy to forget, like, oh, what is the name of the secret supposed to be, or how many secrets, what exactly are the secrets that this repository is supposed to depend on. So having some sort of placeholder of all your secrets is a good thing to do there. I want to just zip through, so I'll ignore roasting that repository, just say something good. This one here, Rowan's, we got, instead of .env, the env file here, also this .dsstore. In general, you want to not add these extra things. This env is the Python libraries that were like the virtual environment. I call mine venv, but env is also a common name for this. If you click on it, you can see all the Python libraries that are installed. Unlikely to have security implications, although it could, but unlikely to have major security implications. But really the disadvantage here is that it's just taking up a lot of extra space that this repository, instead of being like a couple of kilobytes in size, is now on the order of 100 megabytes in size. Still not huge, but mildly annoying. This .dsstore thing is a thing that Macs create in every folder on your machine, and it's used for searching like the Finder to make the searches faster. This does have security implications that this could potentially contain some sort of secrets inside of it, so you definitely don't want to add this to repositories. And in general, like if I see or a professional developer sees these sorts of extra things added to repositories, it's a flag that this is not like a serious repository that's going to have code that I want to personally use inside of it. So Alex also had these same things right here. Also, old versions of Python files, like it's common for especially beginner programmers to make a lot of different versions of Python files. But the nice thing about Git, though, is that we can travel back in time in order to, like if there is a version of an old file that we want to get to, we can travel back in time with Git in order to get those. So you definitely don't want to be adding like the old files at the same time to the same repository, and getting in the habit of trying to use Git to, if you need to travel back in time, is the thing to do. If you really have to add, or if you really want to have multiple like older versions of files in your repositories, then just don't add them to the Git repository. Just leave them in the folder. Other Alex, also same problem right here. 2 extra docsum old and old docsum classic renaming techniques right here. The old code folder right here, same issue. This happened for a lot of people. Okay, here, dance code. So just the minor thing that if you're writing functions that do not have LLM stuff inside of them, again, you should always have doc tests that this is a very minor like function. I can just look at it and it's obvious what it is to do in something like this. But it's still good to be in the habit of writing doc tests for these sorts of things, and adding them into your test suite. So add doc tests. Every function that's not using LLMs in the next assignment will have to have doc tests. And eventually we'll be getting to every function, including LLM functions, need to have doc tests as well. What we were looking at here. Okay, yeah, so the same sort of issue. No doc tests, not even here an explanation about what the function is doing with the doc string. So you always have to have those doc tests and doc strings. This one is a little bit more subtle. So an important thing to pay attention to right here. So this function up here is the one that I basically did in class with the split documented chunks. As an aside, a lot of you did not use the version that I did in class and made your own version. That's a totally great thing to do. The version I did in class had a lot of, I was just doing it quickly and had a lot of weird things about it. So your own versions were uniformly better than my version. So people who did your own version, that's great. But it's the one I had in class, that looks good. That's easy for the doc test thing to go through. There's also a function down here, though, of summarizer. But the thing that's very subtle here is this summarizer function is not what we call a top-level function. Oh, I hate that GitHub does this. I can't just click on things to highlight and show what they are. The summarizer is not a top-level function. I can see that because there's this indentation over here to the left-hand side, this defined summarizer, and it does have a doc string here explaining what it does. There are no doc tests inside of this, and that's okay because it's using the LLM. But even if there were doc tests inside of this doc test would not run because this is not a top-level function. This is sitting inside of the if name equals main if statement. And so this function only exists when the program is called in certain ways and does not exist when the program is called in other ways. In general, you probably want all of your functions to be top-level functions, not inside of like an if statement like this that gates when it might or might not be available. Let's see, there. Here, there's another good example of using an example environment about what you should have. So this is Albert's code right here. There's pointing out a good thing again about having 2 Python files here, but now this is not an extra Python file that's like an old version of the code. This is like separating out code into 2 separate files for reusability's sake. Now there's Grok wrappers. There's a class here that for interacting with Grok could be used on other systems if you wanted to. The main thing I wanted to say here is that in Python, so Python programmers, often called Pythonistas, somebody who really considers themselves Python programmers would never, like this is like the ugliest thing to a Python programmer, having multiple Python files in your top level folder right here. It's universally the case that Python programmers will create a folder named with the same exact name as whatever the repository name is. So in this case, docsum, and all of the actual code, if there's more than one file, it'll go into that docsum folder. There are other languages that have other standards about things, but this is how Python does things. And so there's one way that like I can tell whether somebody has like a serious Python background versus a background in other languages, is sort of how they structure their projects. But in general, Python, people always have a folder, and the name of that folder is the exact same name as the repository, and that's how you know where all the Python code is going to end up being. Okay, Nolan's here was super exciting to me because the code here, I was looking through it, and it's all super well commented and excellent. And then I noticed at just the very end over here that you forgot to do the actual like the handling the large documents parts. But you actually did like all the splitting and stuff in a really fancy way, which is really nice. But yeah, so fix that. Other things. So in the README files, one thing that students often do is comment about like this is a repository for a class, and it's not wrong to do that. It's just not like ideal to do that because if somebody like I don't know somebody else is looking at the repository or showing it off for whatever reason in like an interview or something, just highlighting the ways that this is not your own original work is not the thing that you want to be doing. So that's one of the reasons in this class I'm not having you fork my repositories as starter code, but having you create your own repository is so that it looks like to an outside observer that this is like your own special thing from scratch that you had the idea to do. And you don't need to lie and say that, but there's no reason to let people not assume things like that. So in general, recommend not mentioning that things are for class and just letting the work itself speak for itself. Last one that I had here. Oh yeah, just failing test cases. All the test cases had to be passing to get credit. A handful of people had some failing test cases for different reasons, or I looked at your test cases and you were missing different steps like running the doc tests or something. And if that's you, then you did get a 0 for the assignment, but you just fix it. If you need help fixing it, happy to help, and I'll get you the full credit back for that. Yeah, that's summary of everything, but I missed maybe one last thing that I saw in a lot of people's code, but I guess I didn't have the tab fully open. Is just like the what's called good Python style. I can't think of the term right now that Python people actually use for that. Pythonic, that's a good adjective for it. PEP 8 is the thing I'm thinking of. It's the description of how Python programs are supposed to be formatted in order to be formatted correctly. A lot of people had like weird white space differences going on in things. I like to divide code up into, I think of them as paragraphs. One white space indicates that one blank line indicates that you go from one paragraph to another. If the paragraphs aren't self-explanatory, I put like a topic sentence as a comment up here. And so that as I'm reading code, I just like read the topic sentence and know if I have to read that paragraph or not to understand what the code is doing. But you generally want to avoid like big blocks of white space in random places. Top level blocks, PEP 8 suggests two lines between code and other locations, at most one line between code, never wanting 3 lines between code. And similarly, like never extra white space in doc strings. It was a pretty common thing that probably half the repositories had was PEP 8 violations, not following these like Pythonic style guides. Not critical. I'm not going to lose points for things like that in class, but that is, again, the sort of thing that tells an outside observer, if they're looking at your code for whatever reason, about like, is this person like seriously in the Python community, or are they more of an outsider to the community? And it's probably good for you all to be signaling for career reasons, to be signaling that you are really like in the Python community. Any questions about anything stylistic or things like that? Yeah, you can.
Just confirming, so even if we're using the function for the function to run the LLM, you want us to be providing test for every function that we need?
This is a good question. So the question is, should every possible function, including LLM functions, have doc tests? And the answer is no, that only if a function does not involve an LLM, it 100% should have a doc test. The only examples, well, we'll go into the repository for the next homework here in a little bit, and I'll show you examples of ways to create doc tests for things involving LLMs. But you won't have to do that for this assignment. Yeah. But definitely, if you're creating a function that does not involve an LLM somehow, it should have a doc test inside of it. Good question. Any other questions? Yeah, I mean.
Just go over which what years and DS stores that you could have in your LinkedIn.
So Mac machines add this .ds store file in every folder on your computer. And so every folder in your Git repository is going to have that .ds store file. And you want to make sure when you run git add, you don't add that file. So the best thing to do is in your git ignore file, add .ds store. Yeah, it's a good general question. Like, what's the characteristics of files that you do or don't want to have? The answer is that, so the purpose of this Git repository, any Git repository, is so that somebody else can clone it on their machine. They have never spoken to you. They know nothing about you, but they can follow whatever is in the README and the code will run. And so you definitely need every file that is required for that. And you also want to include no files that are not required for that. So there are some maybe edge cases where there might be some debate, but something like the .ds store or these virtual environments, these things, definitely not things that are needed to run. That like the virtual environment is something that is specific to one person's machine and their version of Python and your operating system, all those things. So even if you include this, the other person can't use that. They have to recreate their virtual environment from scratch. So that's why that shouldn't be included. The DS store doesn't contain useful code, so that shouldn't be included. And like these old Python files shouldn't be included because they're not part of the actual program that you're trying to distribute to other people that other people should be able to run. Just the one is. Does that answer your question? Yeah, it's a good question. In general, all of these stylistic-y sort of questions too that are maybe not directly related to the class, but good, great questions to be asking. Yeah, Ethan.
Sorry, can you just go for the stylistically how we should format our files?
Yeah, the thing to look for is a thing to Google. I'll just do it right here. PEP8, PEP8. PEP stands for the Python Enhancement Proposal. There are now about, I don't know, on the order of 1,000 to 5,000 of these things. So the author here, Guido van Rossum, the very fuzzy now over up there for you guys, huh? The author of Python here used to be the benevolent dictator for life, but he has since stepped down from that position and is no longer involved in Python governance. But this is basically the way that he said that Python should be formatted. And because he created it, he is our benevolent dictator. Everybody follows him. So it's good at some point in your coding career just to have a read through of this and all the different things that Python code is sort of expected to follow. Does that answer your question? Okay, so let's switch gears to our actual new material for today. And so again, we're working on this retrieval augmented generation stuff, RAG. And the idea behind this is somehow we're using a database in our queries that somebody asks us a question like this, and our machine learning model, our large language model, doesn't know the answer to that question by itself. And that could be for many reasons. One of them, like if we're talking about the presidential debate that happened yesterday, is that the model was definitely trained well before yesterday and doesn't know things about the presidential debate or more broadly about current news. And so in your assignment this week, you'll be using this RAG technique to get these recently created articles and get the LLM to be able to answer questions about those recent articles. The way we do this with RAG is that we find some articles related to this query. That's this retrieval step. I have some examples right here. Not all of these articles are 100% related to the query, but at least some of them are. And the hope is that by adding these into the context, into the user section of the message that we send off to the LLM, then when we ask the question right here, and with our new prompt up here, we will be able to, the model will know to look through these articles here to find the answer and get better results. We left off last time. We just took a brief look at the code, but we haven't talked about this retrieval step at all, how the database stuff works. That's what we'll spend today doing. Any questions about anything big picture or I guess anything at all before we get started? Okay, then. So the database that we will be using is SQLite. And I want to just say a couple more praises about SQLite before we get started. Where's the link here? This is the link that I'm looking for. SQLite is probably the most famous single piece of software in the world. Yes, even more famous than things like Microsoft Windows or Macs or those like major operating systems. And it's certainly deployed more than any of those systems. So there's probably at least 1,000 different like deployments of SQLite in this room right now. Every Android, iPhone, laptop has multiple versions of it going on inside of it. Every television set that's made these days has SQLite inside of it. Every like car these days has SQLite inside of it. And by this estimate over here, there are currently more than 1 trillion SQLite databases in active use. Probably the most widely deployed software of any type anywhere in the world, this SQLite database. And so it's basically never wrong to use SQLite for a problem. That if your like first instinct of something that you're doing is to reach for SQLite, then that is a good thing to do. SQLite maybe will not scale to like Instagram size where you have billions of people working on your database at once, but it will certainly scale to like millions of files and users on your database just fine. So we'll be using SQLite instead of these vector databases that are sort of more popular, but less generally useful, and in my opinion, just less good at everything. Okay, I'm gonna switch my screen over here. Let's create 2 windows and I'll get my terminal set up, cd/rag news. And let's see, I will stay in the master or in the solution branch here for a second. And actually, before doing this, I forgot there's the issue that's been posted that I wanted to go over. I guess there's 2 issues here. First one, I made this one. Just a real quick class survey for you all about how things are going, difficulty of homeworks, just 3 questions. So take a minute at some point to fill it out, and I'll adjust the course potentially based on your all's feedback. The other issue is, click here, a really good issue about how to get this RAG news system up and running. And I'll skip over the actual question of the issue and just come down to my response down here. And there's 2 parts to this response that I have. The first is that if for whatever reason you ever want to get a new version of Python installed, the sort of standard way, easy way, has some problems. So standard and easy are in scare quotes here, but this is like the first thing that everybody will recommend to you is to just run this command on your terminal, and that'll come come up with a little menu about different things that you can do to get different versions installed. It'll work on definitely Mac and Linux machines, and it'll work on any new Windows machine if you have, depending on how Windows is set up. The reason that I brought this up is because the versions for the requirements.txt file in this repository have a lot of things to install and a lot of fixed version dependencies, and they only work on my particular version of Python 3.9 point something. You could get that installed if you wanted to by running this, and then you could install all of those libraries. But you don't have to do that. I made a new change to the repository here, moving where some files, some modules are imported. So I used to have these three things up here imported at the top level of the code. I've changed that so that they are only imported inside of the one function that needs them, which you don't have to do anything with. You don't have to call or write anything about it. And so you don't have to actually install all of those modules in order to get the code to work in this assignment. All you have to do is install that Grok API again. And so this is my recommended workflow of how to test that extract words function. That again, this first line up here, just making sure that you have that new version of the code, making sure that Grok is installed, and then after you do Python 3, you can import the RAG news library, and you can call your extract words function or the whatever function you're trying to test, see if it works or not using something like this. Yeah, I don't know. If you work through that, things will probably come up, weird edge cases about things. Happy to get those resolved for you, but this is the simple way to get things into a state where you can actually evaluate, test whether your extract keywords function is working or not. Here, when I do Python 3 without a file to the right of it, then I have to import that file explicitly. And it's a little bit annoying that when I want to call those functions, I have to do rag news and then the dot for that function. If you want to avoid having to do this step over here, avoid that, then you can do Python 3, the name of the file over here, the -i right here for interactive. And this will run the program for you in what's called interactive mode. The program, again, has this sort of REPL loop environment where it asks you this prompt. So you're not in Python yet at this point, you're in the actual program. And in order to leave the program and get into Python, you press Control-D. Anytime you see instructions anywhere that has an up caret like this up caret is the control character. And so you press Control-D, and that takes you out of the program into Python. We know we're in Python now because we have the triple greater than sign right here instead of the rag news prompt. So not in rag news after pressing Control-D in Python. So this -i and then the name of a Python file, another good sort of debugging technique to be able to get into Python and test out your functions. Definitely recommend that everybody works through both of those two things. Make sure that you can do them because it'll make your coding life much easier to be able to get into Python in both of those ways. But if you have any questions about doing that at any point, happy to sit down with you one-on-one after class or in office hours or sometime and figure out what's weird about your environment where this is maybe not working. Okay, so a lot of things. Any questions about anything? Yeah.
Are you able to test to see if your environment setup is working properly before you track keywords?
If you can do this and there's no error messages, then everything's working good and no problem. Yeah. Good question. Okay. So let's go back over here, and I want to let's walk through a little bit more about what's happening in the repository here. In order to, I'm going to look at the code here for a little bit. So I'm going to check out the master solution or the master branch instead of the solution branch, and that way I won't broadcast the solution here. We'll vim ragnews.py and take a look at this code. Yeah, so I'm using Vim right here. This error message is not super important. It means that I have this already open somewhere else, and I press E2 to edit it again. The first thing that I want to do is there's a class inside of here called ArticleDB, and I want to take a look at how this class works and also walk through some ways that you can actually test different things about LLMs without, or in a way that's compatible with doc tests very nicely. So I'll move this window for a second. And so here I'm still at the LLM class in my ragnews.py file. Again, every class should have this doc string that explains in English what it does, and then has some like example usage. And again, this example usage is a doc test, and so as a user of this class, you can be sure that this code is actually going to work, or like that it's going to do what it's advertised to do, because the doc tests have guaranteed it's run all this code and guaranteed that it does what it wants to do. One of the things that's sort of nice about doc tests is that each of these individual tests, they're not like totally isolated from each other, but they're all in the same session of Python. So again, these triple greater than signs, anytime you see that, you should think that this is happening inside of a Python interpreter. And so this first line over here, this is like I type in this line exactly as it is into the Python interpreter. And if I do that, I'm not going to get anything printed out, because Python just doesn't print out when you assign something to a variable. And then I can ask the length of this, this thing right here. And we haven't added any URLs to that yet, so we would get 0 as a result. But if I add a URL over here, then take the length again, and we get 1 as a result. This add URL function, it's not one, again, that you have to implement or touch at all, but this does do a bunch of LLM stuff inside of it. It translates the article if it needs to, it summarizes the article, does a handful of things, and you'll notice that like we're not necessarily evaluating those specific LLM functions, but by having this in the doc test, those LLM functions are getting called, they are doing stuff, and we're just ensuring at least that they're not generating error messages. So having these sorts of sessions of include functions that include calls to LLMs is one of the standard good ways of testing your LLM code. This also gives you a sense, hopefully, of starting to think about how this ArticleDB class works, that it's going to contain a bunch of articles that have been added somehow from URLs. URLs can be long and ugly, so instead of like actually typing in the URL over here, I have this, this test URLs right here, and so this is just some like arbitrary URL. The actual URL itself, not super important, but some arbitrary URL passed into this right here. This right here is the function that is going to be more important, that we have articles equals db.findArticles. This is the thing that you're going to have to implement for your RAG search engine, your retrieval augmented generation. This is going to be the retrieval part of that. And this, like these doc tests right here, show you how this is expected to work. If you implement this correctly, then these doc tests down here will pass. And if you implement this incorrectly, then these doc tests down here will not pass. Again, this particular function will not be using LLM stuff. It'll be using the database stuff with SQLite. And databases, the LLMs, kind of have the same problem with non-deterministicness for evaluating things, for writing doc tests, but this sort of framework of not trying to test everything in just like one go, but splitting it off into multiple lines, a whole Python session, is a good way of creating these tests for these more complicated interactions with outside objects, whether it's an LLM or a database. But this find articles here, my example, what it's doing is I'm passing in just this like one keyword. It happens to be in Spanish right here, economía. And then the articles over here is going to be a list. We get the results over here. The very first article, get the title. Here's what that title is going to be. And if we get this keys here, we can see here's all the information that we have available to us about this article. Part of this is also testing this add URL function up here, because the add URL is what's actually adding it to the database, adding like this title and things. So the fact that like find articles is able to get all this stuff is also testing somehow implicitly this add URL function up here. So it's very common to have these doc tests that are like testing many, many different things all at once, especially in a class. A class has many sort of methods inside of it, these like smaller functions, and the doc tests in the main section of the class, I would expect them to be like integrating tests about all those other functions, and any doc tests inside of individual functions. These are like doc tests that just test that individual function somehow. We'll go through, spend the rest of class today talking about how to write this find articles function. But before I do that, any questions about things? Okay. So this, again, there's 3 functions here that you'll have to implement. This, we talked last time about the extracting the keywords function. Here's the find articles function. That's what we'll talk about today. The last one is the RAG function, which the pseudocode sort of provided for you already. All it is generating the right prompt, calling find articles, calling the extract keywords, and then generating the right prompts to combine all that together. So this is going to be the hardest thing to do for the homework. And after we talk about this today, you'll have everything that you need for the homework assignments. I'm going to put my windows back to back again. And in order to talk about how to implement that, that function, I'm going to create a new file, call it notes.py, and we will call it inclass.py. And I'll write the code down here that shows how to interact with the SQLite database in the right way. And then we will use the terminal above to test that code. So this is the first time I've had notes that I had to write out for class today. This is not the sort of thing that I would ever have memorized, that I would definitely Google all of this every time when I was writing this assignment last week. I was Googling all of these things. Not the sort of thing that anybody has memorized, no matter how much you use Python or SQLite. But SQLite is built into Python. There are many versions of SQLite, or there are 3 versions of SQLite. The 3 is the official and last version of SQLite. There will never be a SQLite 4, and SQLite 1 or 2 are both deprecated. So SQLite 3, this is guaranteed to work on everybody's computer, built into Python. The way you access a database, so up here I have 2 database files that are included in the repository for you all. Claremont.db, this contains all of the news articles published on any of the Claremont College's websites, or the student newspapers like the Student Life or the CMC Forum, or a couple of other ones if you wanted to search through Claremont News. And then the ragnews.db, which contains a bunch of news articles about the election. We'll go with the RAG News one right here to work with. In order to open a database in Python, you do db equals SQLite3.connect, and then the name of the file, ragnews.db. Again, for like Linux machines, every machine that is not a Windows machine, the extensions on file names are not important. And there is actually no standard extension for SQLite. Sometimes you will see .db, sometimes you will see no standard file extension for SQLite. You can see common ones are .db, .sql, .sqlite, .sqlite3. You'll see people use all of these, but it's also the case that all of these things have alternate meanings that are not used with SQLite. Even these .sqlite and .sqlite3 ones here, they have alternate meanings that are not like SQLite databases. And so there's no way to know whether something's a SQLite database just from the extension over here. And that's common with these like low-level programming tools that most programmers think of extensions as like a meaningless thing about a file, and a file name is just a file name. But here, RAG News, that's our actual thing that we're connecting to. Again, every time I am programming, I am always testing my code. Like I never write more than 1 or 2 lines at a time without running my code, whether it's running the doc tests or actually running the code itself. So now that I've written 2 lines of code and a comment, I will come up here and actually run the code and make sure that I don't get any errors. Python 3, and then I called this inclass.py, and no error messages. That gives me some confidence that the code up above is correct, and I can keep going. Any questions so far about anything? So we've just connected to the database and haven't done anything special. Ethan.
At what point do you need to be in the virtual environment?
The question is, at what point do I need to be in the virtual environment? That's a good question. That neither of my 2 desktops or my 2 terminals right here are in the virtual environment. SQLite 3 is the only library I'm going to be using right now in this demonstration, and so this is built into Python, and you don't need to be inside of any virtual environment for it. There's no need to do a pip install to get access to SQLite 3. So for that reason, I don't have to be in the virtual environment. It's not wrong to be in the virtual environment. Everything will work exactly the same. It's just I didn't have to be because we're only going to be using this built into Python thing right here. It's a good question. Let's see, a lot of, in my other previous classes, a lot of them have used SQLite in various ways. Usually in the past, we've used all my other classes have used the SQL Alchemy library. This is another popular way to interface with SQLite. This library is what we call database independent, meaning that it can be used with SQLite or Postgres, MySQL, any of these relational databases, any of these databases that support SQL. SQLite 3, though, is specifically for SQLite. And if I'm only using SQLite, I would tend to prefer SQLite 3 instead of SQL Alchemy because this has more dependencies. And so it's more things to install, more places for things to break. And so that's why I'm using SQLite 3 right here. Okay, the next thing to do, so this actually loads the file right here, is to create what's called a cursor. Cursor equals db.connect. Exactly why we need this line isn't super important, but every time you want to access the database, there's just something that you have to do. And instead of accessing this db variable correctly, you'll access this cursor variable. Technically, what this cursor variable is it's like a collection. It's all the data that you need to run a single query. And so you can have multiple queries running concurrently in really fancy projects. I have never had a project where that was useful, but that's what this allows you to do, what this cursor allows you to do. This is a common pattern that you'll see. Basically, every time after you create a database, you'll do this creating a cursor. And then with that cursor, you can run SQL commands. The way I do SQL commands is I create a variable SQL here and then put my whatever SQL command I want to have inside of that variable. I'm curious, how many people here have seen SQL before? Lots of hands. That's good. If you haven't seen SQL, that's okay. The stuff we'll need for this project is pretty straightforward. If you have seen SQL before, the stuff that we'll be using for this project is also something that you haven't used before, at least in my classes. And I'm guessing most of you haven't used before. Well, the first thing to do here with the SQL command is we have to know what sort of tables we're going to be querying from. Real quick, in this bottom window where I have Vim open, I'm going to open up my ragnews.py file. And let's still open somewhere else. I'm going to search here for the create schema. Schema in the SQL world just means like what tables you have available. You can think of a SQL database as like a collection of CSV files or a collection of Excel files. Each one of those Excel files is a table, called a table in the SQL world, and that collection of tables is called the schema. Down here, this is the particular table that we have that stores all of the information about the articles. It's called articles, and these things over here are the columns that are contained in this table. So there's a column for the title of the article, the text of the article, the host name, that's the website that it was downloaded from, the actual URL, the date it was published, the date that it was crawled, the language, the translation, and a summary. Lots of different things inside of this table here. 2 syntaxes that you probably haven't seen if you're familiar with SQL, if you've seen it before. 2 syntaxes you haven't seen is that the fact that this is a virtual table and not a real table, and this is using FTS5. FTS stands for full text search, and this is just the pattern in SQLite that you use if you are doing a full text search on a set of documents. So SQLite supports fast searching through documents. We'll be searching here through the text of these articles to find articles that are related to our query. Okay, in order to, the first thing that we will do here with our SQL query is that I will count the number of rows in our database. The way we do that is select count star from articles like this. This will return the total number of rows in the database. This is the way that that length function is implemented for the class. It queries the database with a query that looks just like this. Again, if the details of what this is doing is not obvious to you, that's okay. The important thing here is how we're going to pass this from this string into the database and get the results out in Python. But I just created a string that contains this SQL command like that. And the next thing that I have to do is I have to execute that command with cursor.execute and pass in the SQL command like that. And this will actually send this to the database. And in order to get the result back, I can say row equals cursor.fetch1 like this. This will get the first row of the results. In this case, there will be only one row. It'll store it in this variable row right here. And then I'll print out that result. I have a handful of little custom macros in Vim that I like to use. One of them is @p, which takes a variable and automatically writes out all the stuff to print it to the screen. I like to print variables to the screen a lot while I'm debugging, and so I have written code that writes code for me to do that. Oh, let's see. SQLite connection has no attribute to connect. What did I do wrong? This is line 7. This is not one that I SQLite 3. Sorry, what was the question?
Line 7, should that be db.cursor, not .connect?
Oh, yes, thank you. So we're getting a cursor here, db.cursor. We've already run this connect command up here. So I got my C words confused there. Cursor equals db.cursor, and hopefully that should fix things. Save that, colon W up here, run that. And so we get that there are 10,000 rows in this database, 10,000 documents that we can search over. I'll do an example next here of how to actually do that search through those documents. But are there any questions about this at all? Yeah. That's a good question. SQL, in general, when you're interacting with SQL from Python, or when you're interacting with any language from a different language, error messages are super awkward and confusing and not helpful, even for me. So this is a particular error message here. There is no database articles, or can't connect to table articles. I had the same thing happen, and I was confused for a long time until I figured out that I had a little typo up here in the file name that I was accessing. I was doing something like access ragnew.db instead of ragnews.db. And one of the things about the SQLite 3 library is that it does not care whether this thing here already exists or not. It will create it for you if it does not exist. If it does exist, then it will use it. And so if you have a typo up here in your file name, then you will not get an error on this line over here. You will get an error on the line that you're actually running the SQL command on, something like down here, line 11, because this database, ragnew.db, hasn't been created for you, doesn't have all this stuff inside of it, but ragnews.db does have stuff inside of it. So lots of potential for confusing error messages here. Another confusing error message that I got was, let's say I think I had some sort of weird typo in my SQL syntax down here. I'm just adding a whole bunch of things like this is not valid SQL syntax down here. But instead of getting an error about having valid SQL syntax, when I run this, you get this weird warning about only executing one statement at a time. Yeah, so if you feel like your error messages, warnings you're getting out of this library are weird and hard to work with, that is also where I am at. And so don't feel alone with that. Happy to help you work through those things. Good question. Okay, I'm going to power on here and do a one last example of actually doing a search through these articles right here. Following this same pattern, basically every time you want to connect to the database, you'll follow this pattern of create your cursor, write your SQL code that does something, execute that SQL code, and then extract the information from the results there. And so in this case, I'll do cursor equals dv dot cursor SQL equals. And now the SQL code that I will use will be this special full text search 5 syntax. In order to see what that looks like, I'm going to come back over here to the web for a second and take us to the SQLite documentation here on the full text search 5. There's a link to this in the class notes right here. You'll have to take a look at some of the things here probably in order to get the your system running to complete the whole project. But at least reading through this overview is a good idea, skimming through it to have a sense of what is possible here. And so it first starts with creating this virtual table. We already did that. This part right here, how you actually do the query, this is what we need. And there's a bunch of equivalent syntax, but this last one right here is the syntax that we'll use. Since it's the shortest, you select star from the table that you're searching over, and then the string that you're searching. One of the things that's weird about SQLite full text search compared to other systems like Postgres is that the full text search, you can't do that on only a single column. It searches every column in the database. So that's why this syntax is the way it is. Coming back over here, so that what this will look like is select, I'll do select title from articles and here, where Trump, Harris, is that how you spell Harris? Are there 2 R's?
Yeah.
Trump, Harris, debate, something like this. So find articles that have those words inside of them, and then row cursor dot execute SQL row. This case, I'm expecting more than 1 row. I'm thinking there's going to be more than 1 article that talks about this. So I'll say rows equals cursor dot fetch all now, fetch all instead of fetch 1. This gives me an iterator in Python. An iterator is something that you can do a for loop over. And so I'll do for row in rows, print out that row like that. And if I rerun this, then hopefully I can see there's a whole bunch of articles now that are being printed, lots of Chinese and Arabic, and I got some Ukrainian and Russian going on in here too. Some Hebrew, some German, lots of different articles about different things about the Trump-Harris debate that happened last night. And so this is the sort of query that you will be doing for your full text search to find articles that are related to whatever the person typed in right here. Yeah.
Why is Harris?
Question is, why is Harris underlined? And that's just in my editor setup. I have it so that it looks inside of strings for things that are misspelled, and it's underlined because it's misspelled. It probably wants me to capitalize that, yeah. So I guess Trump doesn't need to be capitalized, but Harris does. That's, I guess it is a regular word, yeah. So, good question. Any other questions? So one of the things that you'll have to do for your assignment, and again, this all goes into this idea of like prompt engineering and making sure that your prompt is somehow really good for the language model, is that like there are a lot of results up here that we're getting. And I mean, I could add some code to count this, but we can just see it's probably like on the order of hundreds. And it makes sense that there's going to be a lot of news articles about the Trump-Harris debate because I was specifically searching the internet for things that talked about this. And I ran that search again this morning, updating the database with those articles, and we have I think there was the 10,000 articles total. So there's a lot of articles related to this. But if I take all 10,000 of those articles, I can't fit all of them into the size of our large language model. That again, the Grok system has that cap of 30,000, and a lot of these models have even smaller limits of this context window size on how many tokens that they can take at once. And so somehow I have to modify this so that it's only giving me like say 10 articles, and I want somehow like the best 10 articles. The full text search over here, I'll let you read through this right here. It talks about how to get things ordered by the rank, which is going to be like the articles that somehow match the search the best. And you want to order by the rank and then add a limiting clause so that you only take those top 10 of those articles, the 10 best articles that match your search the best. So I guess, yeah, this is basically the query that you'll need, but you also have to make it ordered by how well the result matches the query and take the top 10 of those. Hopefully, if you've done any SQL at all before, this should be super straightforward to you. If you do have questions on how to do this, though, anybody for questions for whatever reason, happy to work through those things with you. After you do this, then all you have to do is put all those articles into a single prompt and pass that to the LLM, and you have your RAG system that you can chat with the news with. Any questions about this or what to do with this? Okay, then that's a good stopping point for us for today. If anybody does have questions about anything, I'll stick around after class to chat with you. Otherwise, this is again at least nominally due next week on Sunday, this coming Sunday. So please do your best to get it done by then. And I will see you next week or in office hours this week. You're welcome.